The only way to really build an intuition of what the AI systems are capable of is by using them every single day, by asking them questions, by getting into this very empirical mindset of you try something, you see if it works. If it doesn't, you kind of change your prompt, you try again, you see if that works, and really just kind of considering it to be both a thought partner as well as a design partner for any of the projects that you've always wanted to build. I also feel like something that has surprised me, as well as the rate at which enterprises are attempting to transform their workforces. The Bay Area is still definitely a bubble. I use AI every day on the order of multiple times per hour. But when I talk to folks in smaller towns within the United States, or who might be information workers or software developers in the Midwest, or where I grew up in Texas, they're still not using it every single day or multiple times per day. And that's something that surprises me. I was expecting much more rapid adoption, especially within the context of a work day. We haven't seen those leaps and bounds improvements just yet at the rate it's expecting.
Welcome to ODSC's AiX Podcast, your gateway to the latest in AI and data science. Whether you're an aspiring data scientist or a seasoned AI professional, we bring you insights from the best minds in the field, shaping the future of AI. This episode is sponsored by ODSC West, the premier AI Builders Conference celebrating its 10th year this October 28th to 30th in San Francisco and virtually. Learn more at odsc.com/California and use the code PODCAST for an exclusive 10% discount. Sheamus McGovern, the founder of ODSC, will be your host today.
Welcome back to the ODSC AI Podcast. And today, once again, I'm joined by Paige Bailey, engineering lead for developer experience at Google DeepMind. Now, Paige has been at the forefront of making powerful AI tools like Gemini, Veo, and Lyria accessible to developers and creators around the world. In this episode, we'll dive into what's new in Google's AI stack, from multimodal video and music generation to real-time agents, reasoning models, on-device intelligence, and AI for robotics. If you want to understand where generative AI is heading, this conversation is for you. Paige, delighted to have you back in the podcast.
Yeah, thanks you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be back, and certainly a lot has happened. I'm also really jazzed about your Agentic AI Summit.
Yeah, actually, you just spoke at our Agentic AI Summit last week, was it?
Yeah,
it was last week.
It's been really fun to see how people are building with agents and how they're experimenting with both kind of the frameworks that have been around for a while, as well as some of the newer ones, or even things like MCP servers. Really loved the audience questions, and y'all had a great turnout.
Yeah, and a very highly engaged audience. I know when we were planning this Agentic AI Summit, we hosted over most of July, and I'm just amazed at the pace of change, the innovation there, and the progress. And wonderful to see how people are adapting evaluations, the infrastructure, talking about risk and governance and all that stuff. But Paige, we're not going to do a long introduction because we actually spoke back on this podcast in October of last year, 2024. And so much has changed. So much has changed within the Google Gemini ecosystem. So give us a very brief intro this time, and then maybe we'll talk about what's changed in your world.
That sounds good. And definitely a lot has changed. For folks who might not have listened to the previous session, my name is Paige. I'm the engineering lead for our DevRel team at Google DeepMind, which we have recently reimagined as the developer experience team, because so much is changing in the world of developer relations and building tools for creators. That means that I support everything from Veo for our video generation to the Gemini APIs and the Gemini models, AI Studio, Gemma, and our open model family, as well as all of the other great research that DeepMind is releasing into the public and trying to get into the hands of people who want to build great software products, but also who want to use these models for things like data analysis or information work.
Yeah, and Paige, I'll encourage people to revisit that podcast and include a link to it in our show notes, because we went over some great tools there like Google Colab. But yeah, you mentioned the Gemini family, and I got to say, I am pretty agnostic when it comes to models. I have Perplexity, Gemini, Anthropic, and Google OpenAI, all the models, and I use maybe at least 2 or 3 of them on a daily basis between my work at ODSC and my work at Cortical, and I'm impressed by them all. But I was especially impressed. My new favorite tool, I tell everyone, and I also love the open source tools like DeepSeek, but especially the Quinn models. But I've been really finding a tremendous amount of value with the Google Gemini Deep Research. That's an amazing tool, and you can make that very accessible to people. But let me step back a bit here. Since our last conversation, the Gemini family has evolved significantly. I think that was prior to the launch of 2.5 Pro, and now the latest one, which I want to talk about a little later, is FlashLite. And also, I'm not sure if people are aware, but there was a pretty remarkable milestone in the whole AI landscape, and that is winning the gold medal at the International Mathematical Olympiad, showcasing that exceptional reasoning and problem-solving capabilities. And that's something I've been very excited about since we last spoke, is this evolution of the reasoning models when they started to come out, this system 1, system 2 type thinking, and now that we have hybrid models can do that. So Gemini 2.5 winning a gold medal at the International Mathematical Olympiad was incredibly impressive. What do you think that reveals about Gemini's current reasoning model and reasoning models in general?
I think that certainly it was very exciting to see so many models perform well at the latest IMO tasks. I believe it was also quite remarkable to take a step back and look at just how far we've come. If you had asked somebody 10 years ago, 5 years ago, how soon they thought that models would be able to compete in those competitions and to really excel at them, the forecasts would have been much, much farther into the future. It feels like we're bringing those timelines much closer to the present. I think that was something that made me take a second look, and certainly very exciting to see the model progress for things like mathematics. I also love that DeepMind in particular has been partnering really closely with mathematicians as well as folks in the hard sciences, so things like physics, to understand how we can build tools and products that will augment their research and accelerate it, as opposed to just trying to create research plans in isolation. There was a really wonderful discussion from a mathematician today that was released via DeepMind. It was about how they've been using the Gemini models to brainstorm parallel thinking and incorporate reinforcement learning techniques to strengthen their research progress. I'll send the link in the chat right now.
That's awesome, Paige. Really appreciate that. So many things you mentioned there, like reinforcement fine-tuning is a thing now. I have noticed the shift. We're still using human labelers for a lot of stuff, but I do see a big shift towards highly experienced, highly accomplished domain experts to help further improve these models, which I think is getting another major uplift. Can you explain the differences between Gemini 2.5 Pro, Gemini Flash? Now there's FlashLite. So
yeah. And then also just this morning, we released the Gemini 2.5 DeepThink, which is the one that won the IMO or got gold medal accomplished in the IMO. Wow. In the Gemini app. There's certainly quite a lot of flavors of Gemini 2.5 floating around at the moment.
So that's fantastic. When we talk about the pace of change, it's literally within the hour. So
exactly.
When might developers or businesses choose one version over the other?
It's a great question. We were discussing some of the capabilities of Gemini 2.5 DeepThink for tackling these really complex, multi-step, multi-stage processes, these things that previously would have taken teams of people or single people hours or weeks to think through. Think of Gemini 2.5 DeepThink as a very special purpose version of Gemini 2.5 Pro that's really great at these more long form, complex, multi-step tasks that you might want to throw a lot of compute at or a lot of time at or a full team at. Consequently, it's a little bit more expensive. It takes a little bit more time to actually get the outputs from the model or the system of models that are going through the different phases of those experiments. That's Gemini 2.5 Pro, which has reasoning baked into the model. If you experiment with it in Google AI Studio, you can see this multi-step planning and reasoning capability. It's a really, really sort of special purpose model that a lot of folks get a lot of value from using it for planning out multi-step projects, doing complex reasoning across code bases. Perhaps in the context of an IDE, they want their results to come back a little bit more quickly. It's also a little bit more expensive than our Flash series and a little bit slower than our Flash series of models as well. Gemini 2.5 Flash is the one that I see most commonly used in production. There are two paths you can take with it. You can either turn on or turn off the reasoning capabilities within Gemini 2.5 Flash. If you keep reasoning and thinking turned on, you can also assign it a thinking budget. You can either give it a lot of room and a lot of space. You can think of it as a scratch pad for thinking through the process it would need to take it to execute on the user's request. If you turn off thinking mode, then Gemini just takes the user's input and immediately produces an output. Given that it's so fast, that it's lighter weight, that it's much more cost effective, it does seem to be a really great model to use for these more production production deployed, latency sensitive use cases. And then FlashLite, Gemini 2.5 FlashLite, is even faster, even more cost effective, but still delivers great capabilities. For the most part, I see most people preferring Gemini 2.5 Flash in production today. We're still pushing the boundaries for what can be accomplished with Gemini 2.5 FlashLite. All of these models, like the entire Gemini family, understand video, images, audio, text, code all at once. They're also really good at supporting some of the complex output modality use cases. Gemini can output and edit images, produce audio in multiple languages, and even steerable audio.
Yeah, very good. Sometimes we have long debates over which versions of these models to use and all the trade-offs, even though they're well documented. And I have to chuckle because I remember a couple of years ago, I was having a debate with a couple of people around this idea of a single dominant LLM, like the Lord of the Rings idea, the one model to rule them all. So that idea of a convergence on a single dominant LLM has turned out to be an oversimplification for sure, for many different reasons, which I think you kind of outlined by explaining how to use one over the other. But before we move on from this, because there's some other great tools that Google has made available, any interesting or unexpected use cases that have emerged in the last 6 months or so? You just mentioned a few.
It's really hard to name a couple, honestly. One of the things that's most exciting for me about Gemini being used for multiple modalities and being used to trigger these more real-time scenarios is that you can start stitching together these models combined with local or on-device models to support things like embodied intelligence. So as an example, our robotics team, they use Gemini Live, which can take in video and audio as inputs, and they use it to control many of the robots that we have walking around Google campus or accomplishing various tasks in our labs. So that's been something that's been truly exciting to see, is you have Live API kind of bringing in lots of information, understanding it, processing it, and using tools to trigger activities that could then control the robot, generate the code that would, allow it to accomplish a given task. As an example, you could say, hey, robot, please go get me that apple. Gemini Live and the Gemini 2.5 series of models would be able to do this detailed planning to figure out what steps would be required in order to accomplish the task, and then decide, well, is this a simple enough call that the main model can do it, or is it something more special purpose? So we need to call the dedicated on-device robotics model in order to generate the code to control and to move the legs or the arm to accomplish the task. I really loved that one. I also feel like we're starting to see much more complex systems of models, and not systems that are acting in a sequence, but processes that are being triggered asynchronously. So you can have one kind of model like a Gemini 2.5 Pro or something similar to build the plan, and then many smaller, more special purpose models to accomplish the given tasks. I've also been really excited by our Gemma 3N series of models, which is, for folks who might not be aware, we have a version of Gemma 3N, which is 4 billion parameters in size. It can understand video, images, audio, etc., but it's also surpassing the capabilities of our Gemini 1.5 Pro model, which was our best model 6 months ago. This model that previously required multiple TPUs to run was very resource intensive. Now you have a 4 billion parameter model capable of doing all of that work. And so when you play forward ahead 6 months from now, this concept of you have one model building the plan and then kind of allocating out tasks to the models that are the right size to accomplish it, that feels like it's going to be a well-adopted pattern long term. Because if you could have a very complex task broken down into 10 steps, and 9 out of 10 could be supported by a model that's small enough to run on device, and only one of them requires a call to an API, then suddenly these systems get much more cost effective. This concept of ubiquitous AI becomes a reality as opposed to just a dream.
That's an interesting turn of phrase. Ubiquitous AI. I really like that phrase because I'm not convinced that super intelligence, the way it's been pushed, is something that's going to be achievable in the near future. I really believe that we should be focusing more on general purpose AI, and AGI is a bit of a distraction. But I want to go back to Gemini for robotics. I love the fact you brought that up. It's something that I'm very keen on. At ODSC West, we're running an AI for robotics track.
Oh, amazing.
This is our second year, so we're hoping to have some robots there, some people from that field there. And it's also something we're very interested in on the venture side as well. There's so many interesting problems to solve in robotics. When I was looking at Gemini for robotics, I was more focusing on how robots can generalize from that vast multimodal data, which Gemini is getting so good at now. Because really what robots struggle in is these kind of open world tasks, right? And instruction following, and of course, getting these robots to have perception, and that perception leads to action, especially around understanding and processing these visual scenes, this perception, and then running commands off that. And now the hype, and I say hype tongue in cheek because part of it I believe in, part of it is hype, but the latest hype is around agentic robotics. We can take large language models like Gemini, as you said, all these advances in reasoning, but that decision planning control layer, which has always been such a huge challenge in robotics, that decision planning control layer. So I'm really excited about robotics are going to be ubiquitous, but we're moving to solve some of these intractable problems.
Yeah. I do feel like being able to rely on a more general purpose model to help with some of the initial phases of helping the robot figure out what to do has a lot of potential. So as an example, if the Gemini model is able to understand the spoken word request of like, hey, please go get me that Han Solo doll, or please go get me that package of Cheez-Its. If Gemini is able to take in the speech request and get it into more of a text format, if it's able to draw the bounding box around whatever in the image is the location where the robot needs to head, if it's able to do any general assessment as to which part of the thing is the most optimal place for the pinchers to target to pick it up, if it's able to do all of that work in addition to build the plan for the robot, the only thing that the special purpose on device model needs to do is to know how to control the hardware and to operate in the physical world, which is quite complicated. But if Gemini is able to handle all of the general purpose heavy lifting, I think that opens up the world a lot more for robotics companies to really focus on what they're great at, which is the hardware layer and the movement of the hardware, as opposed to the more general purpose tasks, which could be anything out in the world.
Super cool. Let's go back, because we're talking a lot about visualization and video here. I hadn't actually paid much attention to Google VO2, and I was pretty struck by Sora when that came out from OpenAI, and we're trying to use it ourselves for a few things. But Sora was limited when Google VO3 came out. Like most things, it was recommended to me by people much more in tune with what's going on than myself. And I got to say that when we talk about state of the art, I really feel that's VO3 state of the art, because it was not only high quality video creation, it brought in what other platforms are missing, synchronized native audio generation, which was super impressive. The effects you could add onto it and the dialogue you could put into it, and even creative controls like cinematographic angles and lighting and style. So yeah, Google VO3 is an amazing achievement. So first and foremost, I would encourage our listeners to check that out. If you can tell us more about your take on this and how people can use this. I was pretty blown away by it, to be honest.
Yeah, thank you for the great feedback. Yesterday, we released image to video via the Gemini API. So it's something that people could go out and test today at Google AI Studio, aistudio.google.com. If you haven't had a chance to visit, you can either create videos just from text prompts. You can use images to seed the input frame for the video, which means you can extend out specific scenes. Right now, when you create content with VO3, the limit for the duration of the video can be 8 seconds long. It is not just the video footage, it's also audio, including spoken word audio, music, background noises, as Sheamus was just mentioning. So lots and lots of additional modalities that help the experience feel more real. We've also improved character consistency. A hack that I like to reference is you can have a character sheet. So a single person from multiple angles, either just their profile or their full body, and say, this is a character that I would like to have for the duration of the scene. VO is actually able to incorporate that entity, if it's an animated character, into the rest of the scene. You can take the final frame from your first generation and use it as the seed frame for the next 8 seconds. Lots of really interesting new advancements around character control, consistency, physics, as you were mentioning before. We also have really interesting capabilities with the VO series of models where you can add objects, remove objects, kind of incorporate them.
Oh, that's cool.
It's really magical to think of what you can accomplish with the model, and then also especially the model plus Gemini. Like I often use Gemini to create the prompts for the VO series of models to make them more detailed and align with the experience I'm trying to create. Long term, these systems of models are the best path forward. At DeepMind, we have the team who works on VO and the team who works on Gemini sitting in the same organization. It helps in that we can co-design the models and the systems perform very well together.
Yeah, I was actually using the text to image stuff for the ecosystems of creators and businesses out there. It's almost like there's so much to do. I don't know where to start. Where would you advise people to start? Like if you're a creator, if you're a business person, like I want to play around with VO3 and AI Studio. I can do text to video, image to video, text to image. The AI Studio is a great sandbox for playing around with this. But what makes it so powerful is the fact that now there's an API attached to this. And I've spent a whole career in my consulting firm building so many apps, which took years and hundreds of thousands to build this stuff that I could build literally in the course of a few days thanks to this API. Yeah, sorry. But going back to my question, where do we start in this exciting world of AI Studio and the API?
I think it's a great question because it can be overwhelming when you consider that the models can do so much. I agree with you. The only way to really build an intuition of what the AI systems are capable of is by using them every single day, by asking them questions, by getting into this very empirical mindset of you try something, you see if it works. If it doesn't, you kind of change your prompt, you try again, you see if that works, and really just kind of considering it to be both a thought partner as well as somebody who could be an intern or a design partner for any of the projects that you've always wanted to build. Within AI Studio, we have the ability for you to experiment with the Gemini models, but also Imagine for image generation, Lyria for music generation. We also just recently added a feature called Build, which is kind of a V0 or Bolt style experience where you can describe an app that you would like to have created with the Gemini APIs or Imagine, see it built in real time in front of you. And then there's a button that allows you to deploy it to Cloud Run with all of the API keys obfuscated away. So you're able to create an app, build this thing that you can share with your friends that can accomplish a task that's really grounded in some of these AI systems. But I agree with you. Really, the only way to start understanding what the models can do is by experimenting with them. We released a model today within the Gemini app, introduced VO3 image to video in the API yesterday. These things are changing daily. So even if you find a course that was created 3 months ago, 2 months ago, it's probably out of date. The only way to really start understanding what you can do is by building and trying to interact with the models themselves. One of the nice things about AI Studio is if you can get something working in AI Studio, there's a button that says Get SDK Code. And if you click on the Get SDK Code button, then whatever you just did in the UI, it gives you the code to do it in Python or TypeScript or Kotlin or Swift or whatever your favorite language might be. It really is a nice place to get started and to have an IDE to experiment with the models, but also create the API code behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. And a very intuitive platform to get started on that as well. And even for advanced practitioners, there's so much that can be done with it. And you actually just referenced Lyria a few times. For our audience who are not familiar with that, that's the text to music model.
Yes.
If you could talk a little bit more about Lyria, because again, there's so many great use cases here, right?
I love the features that the team has just recently been working on. So we have Lyria RT, so Lyria real-time for real-time music generation. And to your point, you can specify specific instruments and the tone or quality of those instruments that are incorporated into the generation process. But also, you can do really interesting things like couple it together with Gemini and say, hey, here's an image. Please create a background track for this image. Or here's a video. Now, please generate the background audio for this video. Or I'm playing a video game. Please change the tone and the tempo and the style of the music based on my gameplay activity. If I'm just walking through a forest, perhaps it sounds very serene. If I'm fighting game bosses, then maybe it gets a little more up-tempo and there's a lot more excitement. It pumps up the energy. These things can all be dynamically created either through text, images, or video. The team has been working super hard. They've also produced a product called the Music AI Sandbox, intended for music producers, people who are creating compositions. And all of this was kind of designed in collaboration with the artists themselves. It's intended to be something that can accelerate and to kind of hyper optimize their work for this, get the sounds that they hear in their heads out into the world at a much speedier rate. I personally have used it for everything from generating background audio for ads to creating background audio for video reels. I really do love it for the gameplay situations because the tempo for Lyria real time can change quite actively.
Yeah, and what's exciting about this is it's really bringing multimodal to a whole new level. There's so much you can layer on here. And, through my experience through ODSC, like working with multimedia companies, doing all the recordings at conferences, it's very complicated syncing up the audio. It's a very specialized skill set, which will remain so, but it's making this more accessible to the rest of us. One concern out there, and I know there was just the Google I/O conference recently, and I think this was addressed, but what can you say to the concerns around deepfakes? Because the images and videos now, they're so photorealistic. Can you speak to deepfakes and copyright?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do know that at Google, the teams in responsible AI and the models teams themselves are thinking about it very seriously. There are two sort of features that have been introduced into both Imagine as well as VO, one of which is digital watermarking. So you can see a little logo that something has been AI generated, it's human visible. But there's also something called Synth ID, which is not human visible, but is a watermarking technique for the asset itself. It looks identical to something that isn't watermarked if you're just a person looking at it, but behind the scenes, there's a way for people to understand, okay, this content was generated synthetically as opposed to being filmed in real life. And then also there are some introductions and guardrails in place for the APIs themselves. So things like not being able to generate video content of children, not being able to generate video content of well-known public figures, that kind of make sure that these concerns are at least somewhat mitigated. I think that's something that we have the ability to do by creating the model from 0 to 1 and also owning the API surface. Whereas a lot of teams that are perhaps releasing open models, there are no natural guardrails in place. And so that can be a lot more concerning.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of like a full stack approach. That's good insight in those two techniques, which I believe are actually very powerful and responsible. Another thing I've gotten very excited about since we last spoke, and we did have a podcast that has been released with Ian Cairns from Free Play and talked a little bit about voice. I've also been playing around with Pipecam, and I think we've had OpenAI at our conference talking about their voice AI agent as well. One of the cool ones I've seen, and I think you referenced it, was the Gemini Live API.
Yeah.
That's capable of not just video and text streaming, but also bidirectional voice and a bunch of other stuff. So we can talk about the voice a little bit and then the Google Live API, which I know does more than voice. My view is that voice is going to become the dominant interface for AI. As I said before in the last podcast, I've typed enough keystrokes to last multiple lifetimes.
Yeah, so we've recently introduced quite a few more features around voice and audio for the Gemini models, one of which is the Gemini text-to-speech API. We now have an API that allows you to send in a script with a single speaker or multiple speakers, configure the different voices, including different languages, styles, tones, and instruction, and then have Gemini generate the audio to accompany that transcript. It's really fun to experiment with. It feels a lot like the podcasts that get generated with Notebook LM. If you add in prompting and stylistic instructions, I highly encourage folks to test that out in AI Studio as well. And then, of course, the Gemini Live API, which supports multiple languages, everything from English, including English with multiple accents, to Spanish or German or Chinese or Hindi. You can have a conversation with Gemini, use it to trigger tool calls, even do things like screen sharing. It's been pretty magical to see. As an example, if you add in your system prompt for the Live API, you're a helpful customer support person for my product. If I encounter any bugs or issues, your job is to help me resolve them. If you start a conversation with the model, sometimes it even asks you to share your screen so it can get additional insights and see the bug in action to help you better triage and resolve it. It's been really cool to see these get released, and then they're also available via APIs for folks who want to incorporate them into their projects themselves. I believe the Gemini Live API is now around 1 cent per minute or something similar. The prices would incorporate everything from the speech to text to the screen understanding piece to the text to speech to have the model give the appropriate responses.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'll encourage people to check it out themselves because it's a great suite of tools. I want to let the conversation back up again to what we initially talked about last October. I got to say, the whole AI landscape has undergone, I would almost say, seismic shifts, right? We just had our agentic AI summit, which really highlighted agentic autonomy, seeing these agents being able to decompose workflows into tasks, goal management, and recall and long-term context has been pretty amazing. And you see the market has diversified dramatically. And now just a few days ago, the US AI Action Plan going on. And then, of course, Stargates and all this other stuff. What has surprised you most in the last 6 months, apart from what we've already covered?
Yeah, I think the rate at which all of these things are evolving is just completely unprecedented. The Gemma 3N anecdote that I mentioned before of a model that's small enough to fit on a laptop being able to surpass the capabilities of the best model 6 months ago is pretty magical. I also feel like something that has surprised me as well is the rate at which enterprises are attempting to transform their workforces. The Bay Area is still definitely a bubble. I use AI every day on the order of multiple times per hour. Like I'm constantly pulling out Gemini and AI Studio to help me do everything from respond to emails, write docs, plan out work that needs to be accomplished, to write code, to update examples, to kind of analyze data. I'm using it for literally everything. I've been experimenting with it to create video content for a lot of the new features that we've recently released, because having automated video content generation is so much easier to do as opposed to, attempting to have a person record it every single time you push an API change. So I'm using it constantly. But when I talk to folks in smaller towns within the United States, or who might be information workers or software developers in the Midwest, or where I grew up in Texas, they're still not using it every single day or multiple times per day. And that's something that surprises me. I was expecting much more rapid adoption, especially within the context of a work day. We haven't seen those leaps and bounds improvements just yet at the rate it's expecting. So our model capabilities increasing dramatically, exponential growth curves in all contexts. Like I think a lot of people in the Bay Area are also kind of, obsessed with trying to figure out how we can incorporate these tools to make us all, harder, better, faster, stronger. But the future doesn't seem to be distributed equally. And so trying to figure out how we can help educate folks on better how to incorporate AI systems into their work, as well as prepare them for what might be coming next. I think we all should be trying to brainstorm the best approaches to doing that.
Those are some well put points, Paige, because I have been thinking a lot about this whole notion of the speed of change. Like we've seen through the Industrial Revolution, the evolution of technology going back even hundreds of years, change and people's ability to adapt to that change has always lagged, right? It's kind of like when I used to work in financial markets, we had to spend a lot of time studying the information lag and the news lag. And expecting people to adapt at the pace of technology change is not as realistic. So I think a lot of companies, especially of us in the heart of the Silicon Valley and the AI bubble, need to take that into account. And a great case in point, I was just in Chicago giving a meetup talk there, and everywhere I went, and when I say everywhere, I'm waiting at the airport, I go to a restaurant to have a meal by myself, I hear all these conversations about AI. At that Chicago meetup, I gave a talk on MCP, communication protocol between agents. And I got a very good question there from one of the attendees. The use case I gave was, I'm also head of AI at Cortical Ventures. And over the last 3.5 years, we built out a stack for using AI to help us fund the next generation of AI startups. When I first started there, I applied a lot of hedge fund techniques for looking for signals, people signals, company signals, open source signals, doing data science techniques like a random forest. And then when LLMs come out, we built a bunch of agents. We built a people agent, a company agent, a startup agent. And now, of course, we're building out an agentic AI workflow. I showed my architecture there in the stack and how it evolved. Someone asked me, if you were building this application again today, what's a good stack to build this with? So what advice would you give to somebody who's already been on the data science, LLM framework journey? What's a good stack, and what do you see best practice?
Yeah, it's also a really great question. Many of these agent frameworks were created in the very early days of large language models, when the APIs were first available, when the models weren't quite as capable, before MCP was released into the public and into the vernacular. And I think there are certainly quite a few agent frameworks to choose from, like everything from LangChain and LangGraph to Pydantic AI versus Crew AI or Llama Index. It felt for a long time like everybody was trying to build an agentic framework, when the reality is now many of the things that people want to do, you probably don't need a framework at all. You just need a way to prompt the model effectively on what you're trying to accomplish and set it loose with MCP servers for whatever systems it needs to communicate with. Right now, we're putting a lot of onus on the user to both craft the prompt as well as to define what MCP servers it needs. Probably in the future, that won't be required either. There will be some sort of universal authentication protocol where I just say, here's my login information for my 1Password for all of the, or whatever your favorite kind of username password configuration management system is. You know what tools I have access to. If I don't have access to tools, feel free to sign me up. But here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Do whatever you need to do in order to accomplish that task. And the reality is that, I think as software developers, for the longest time, we all tried to have this perspective on, we need to be creating systems that are deterministic. We need to have full control over everything. We need to make sure everything is rigorously tested, and it's all our responsibility and our job to do that. A lot of this new world of agents is ceding control to the model and just giving the model the information it needs to figure out what kind of system it needs to construct to solve the task. I think for folks who are used to much more deterministic ways of doing work, it's going to be an exercise in behavioral change to figure out how to make that happen with agentic systems.
Yeah, a lot of challenges there. And that leads nicely to my kind of last question, Paige, because I never ask people to predict the future anymore, multi-years in advance, because I think it's more fun to ask, what do you see coming in the next 3 to 6 months that you're excited about, or what do you think's on the horizon?
Even that feels very far away. And, my own personal timelines, I already mentioned that they'd been disrupted this year by the Gemma 3N release. I honestly feel if we've already seen an instance where we have a tiny on-device model capable of surpassing the abilities of our best model 6 months ago, then we could probably play that forward and imagine a world where a VO3 caliber model or a Gemini 2.5 Pro DeepThink caliber model is able to be run on a local device as opposed to needing to send calls to model servers. And if that's the case, what can you accomplish if AI is ubiquitous, small enough and cheap enough to be put everywhere, and resilient enough that it doesn't need a Wi-Fi connection? I also think that means we'll start capturing lots of data that we haven't even been considering historically. Right now, the models are really good at accomplishing the tasks for all of the data that we've been feeding them. But there's a whole bunch of data that just hasn't been captured due to lack of storage or people not knowing what it might be useful for. If we invest in capturing data on everything, that means we would be able to crack insights into the physical sciences or the biological sciences much more effectively. That is an optimistic hope that we'll see a proliferation of on-device models capable of doing things that our best frontier models are able to do today. And then also selfishly, I really, really hope that we're able to help upskill all of these folks who are information workers, software developers, etc., to really understand what's coming and how they can stay up to speed and build the mindset of constantly learning as opposed to not having the experimentation mindset.
We are certainly united in that mission. And as before, you've been so generous with your time. How can people best follow your work? Because I would really encourage them to plug into all the great insights that you provide.
Thank you for saying that. I feel like we're all just trying to release as much as we can out into the world. I'm dynamic webpage pretty much everywhere on the internet, on LinkedIn, on Blue Sky, on Twitter, and all the places on GitHub. I have a perspective of building with a garage door open. So as I'm creating things, I just share them and hope that they're useful. And then also have started blogging on Medium and Substack. Going forward, it would probably make sense to start doing some streaming, but all of that would be under just dynamic webpage.
Well, that's fantastic. I'll include some of those links in our show notes as well. Paige, I got to say, it's always an honor to gain from your wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much once again for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having us and for doing all of the great work to get these tools and techniques out into the world. I am so excited to see all the videos from the Agentic AI Summit and really appreciate you and your team.
Thank you so much for the kind words, Paige, and we will certainly talk again.
Awesome. Thank you.
Your engagement directly contributes to the growth and success of our community. Please subscribe now and don't miss out on the next enlightening episode. This episode is sponsored by ODSC West, the premier AI Builders Conference celebrating its 10th year this October 28th to 30th in San Francisco and virtually. Learn more at odsc.com/California and use the code PODCAST for an exclusive 10% discount. Supporting our podcast by subscribing not only helps our small dedicated team at ODSC, but also unlocks exclusive benefits for you.